to to this place, to baseball, to everything. I mean, he's just, I've been trying to think about, you know, how I would explain why he was so important to so many people, and I think it comes down to a couple of things. First of all, he was an incredibly generous person with his time for a lot of different groups and people. If I get this story right, and Tina can correct me if I don't, I mean, we realized something was wrong because the person that he usually took to buy groceries for every week didn't hear from him. So that shows you the kind of person that he was. He was here when I got here. He's one of the people that has made this place so special to me. He would do anything for anybody. He loved nothing more than to have somebody come in here and ask a history question that he didn't know the answer to. And before the person could even sit down, he'd be off and running to the city directories or some other place to try and find the answer. So because we couldn't meet at Hale, and we will be open there later this month, but because we couldn't meet at Hale, we wanted to do this anyway to mark the year since we lost him and to give people a chance to tell stories. As you also probably know, if Ed were here, he would be unbelievably cranky about everything that we're going through. He was an incredible combination of great goodwill and generosity and just total crankiness, particularly in September. So we're glad he didn't have to go through all this. For me, Ed represented the best of the kind of people that are associated with this kind of organization. His generosity of spirit, his generosity of time, his generosity of money. We all absolutely adored him. We still think about him every week. And in fact, I said to somebody, maybe it was Daniel, within the last couple of days, Ed would know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But didn't I say that?
Yes, you did.
So this is for you to tell stories. We're also using this as an opportunity to encourage gifts for Hale Farm, which was his favorite place. And as you probably know, we've done a huge amount of work there. We're still doing work there. Here we are. Look at that. The picture on the left is from the Bancroft era around the turn of the 20th century. And the picture on the right is from this week. So you can see, thanks to CPA money, we are restoring the back of the house the way it was when the Bancrofts lived there. Ed knew about this project and he was really excited about it. He loved to see things happening at Hale. He loved to have people there. And he would say, fantastic, when I talked to him about this. So because we're doing all this, and we're also going to be putting signage out, we thought we'd use it as an opportunity to encourage gifts in his name. So I just want to stop there and say, again, welcome to all of you. We're delighted to have you here on Ed Brown Day. Next year, we will have this at Hale, and hopefully we will see you there. So, so with that, I'll just stop for a minute and see if anybody has anything they'd like to mention. I know Lisa said she couldn't stay for the whole thing, so feel free to jump in and tell us an Ed story.
Hold on 1 second before you jump in. I wanted to say hello to everybody. And I also wanted to mention, because this is our first Ed Brown Day and it is not going to be our last, I am recording this so that we can start taking some oral histories. And so I just needed to let you know or warn you that it is being recorded right now. So let's have some fun and let's make some history. So it looks like Faye has her hand up. Faye, did you want to jump in?
I do. Hi, everyone. I am sitting here. I probably look ridiculous because I'm on an iPhone, because I'm at 223 Webster Avenue, which was Ed Brown's house.
Oh!
So I'm sitting on the front steps and I'm looking at the back of the Glen Urquhart School, and I'm just thinking of a funny Ed story. And I live in the Farms. I live right around the corner. And I would sometimes pick Ed up to attend events. And one night I picked him up And I have a big car. I have a Volvo, and I push the seat all the way back. But you know, Ed had long legs, but what you may not have known, and I didn't know till that night, was Ed wore a size 13 shoe.
Yep.
And so he could hardly get his legs in and barely get his feet into the car. And he was just like, well, you know, I'm sorry, but I got big feet. It's going to take me a while to get in here. So anyway, I'm sitting here just thinking of Ed and thinking of his big feet. And I just thought I'd share that with everyone.
Yeah, why did he drive such a small car? He had to basically fold himself in half to get into it.
He must have, because I had a big car and he could hardly get in. So he did have a small car. I don't get it, but I don't know. Small car, big man with a big heart. I guess that's it.
He didn't drive a small car as much as he drove an inexpensive car.
Ah.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, Ed was a frugal man.
Anyways, I don't know if I have a funny story, but I had the privilege of spending quite a bit of time with Ed, not in the last year or two, but prior to that for many years. At Hale, I lived right down the street, and I would do tours with him and then learned a lot from him and was able to do tours myself. And I just have memories of sitting with him some Saturdays when Hale would be open to the public out on the front lawn. Sometimes it would just be the two of us for a while, and being able to just listen to his musings. And you know, he knew everything about that property, including the all of the trees. You know, it was sad when you guys finally had to take the tulip tree down. We used to inspect that every year and go through what was going on there. And you know, we'd come around where you guys are doing stuff here, and there was some milkweeds there, and he had taken some milkweeds and would explain the importance of what those are, demonic butterflies. I never knew that, so that was an education. I got education in not just the house, but in that kind of stuff from Ed. And tremendous amount about the house. I remember, I think it was actually one warm September morning, because I had just come back from a business trip. We were sitting out there, and there was some birds going after one of the windows, and that was just that he was kind of funny about. He was really like focused on them. What are they doing? And it was anyway. So I just have a lot of memories. I was very fortunate in that I got to spend, in retrospect, a good amount of one-on-one time with Ed on that property, and I still think about him all the time when I walk by it. So. So those are my Ed musings. He taught me so much, learned so much about that and how to tell stories about places. Really grateful for that.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, this,
Yes.
hey, it says M. Kane there. That's my wife's, I'm using my wife's Zoom. I'm actually Paul Coombs. I know Ed for over 50 years, and one of my little stories, well, I grew up in Beverly, and I grew up on 59 Hale Street. My mother still lives on 59 Hale Street, just a block down from the Hale house. But, and I only know this because Ed told me this, but I was Ed's first ever Little League draft choice when he became a coach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I figure I was about 8 years old. It had to be around 1963, I think, because back then they had the farm system, which was the beginners, and it was all we got was a hat. We didn't even get uniforms. And that was Ed's first team, was called the Falcons. And he told me, because I stayed in touch with him over the years, that he told me I was his first ever choice. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then he actually, my memory is that after that first year for the Falcons, we used to play down the Cove playground on like dirt kind of diamond. After that, he moved up to, I think was called the minor leagues, and he had a team called the Giants. And of course, he picked me for that team too. So I had him for a coach, I believe, for 2 years before I moved up another step. And I think he stayed he stayed down in the minor leagues for a while. But that was the beginning of Ed's coaching career, and we always had that bond of baseball together over the years. So I thought I'd share that with you guys.
So he must have talked to you about Stuffy McGinnis, right?
Oh, of course, yeah, Stuffy. Yeah, I got the book.
Oh, great.
But another another baseball-related story was that my wife and I moved down to Tennessee from the Boston area in 2007, and on July 3rd, 2007, I got a hold of some really good Boston Red Sox tickets to a friend with some season tickets behind home plate. So we were about to move in July. We were moving down to the Memphis area, and so I invited Ed and my uncle Jack Coombs, who's now gone, to go to the game with us. So we spent the July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July, 2007, which is, I'm wearing my Red Sox shirt here, which they were the champions that year. So all four of us went to the Red Sox game together, and it was just a great memory that we had.
So you're related to Loretta?
Yes, I'm Loretta's oldest son. Yes.
So Loretta was there that day at Hale.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I remember her saying to me, Ed looks really tired. And I said to her, I can't make him sit down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell your mother I said hi.
She told me. Right. And my mother, being a former registered nurse and having 10 children, she was pretty much in tune with when someone was not doing great. But yeah, she told me about that last time that she had seen him there. And Loretta is she's 89 now, and she's still living in the family house at 55 Hale Street, doing very well. So I just thought I'd let you know that Ed stayed in touch with the whole family ever since the early 60s. And he was just Ed, he was generous. He helped me out. I think when I first got accepted to college, he helped me out financially a little bit just to get started, and just little things over the years, as you probably all have experienced. But he kind of adopted me a little bit, so that was pretty cool.
He's a very generous man.
Yeah.
And particularly with people who love baseball.
I do have, I probably won't stay on the whole time, but I just have a little personal Hale House story, because when I was a kid, I grew up right down the block from the Hale House, and back in the day, in the 60s, they had a bookstore, like a retail bookstore. I remember in the left half, some little room in there. And so I got into, whatever age I was, I got into reading the Hardy Boy series. There was like 50 of them or something. Those little blue books. And I remember, trying to save up I had a paper route, Boston Globe. Used to deliver the papers in that whole area. And I remember going there with my 50 cents or whatever it was to buy the latest Hardy Boy book from at the Hale House bookstore. So anyway.
Thank you so much. Tina, you probably remember the bookstore, right?
Yeah, I have a Fanny Farmer cookbook that I got for a wedding gift that came from there. Well, it's got the little sticker in the corner.
Wow.
Where did they have it? What part of the house was the bookstore in?
Well, as you face Hale House, it was on the left-hand side. There was a whole bunch of windows there, and you went in that entrance, and the bookstore was in there.
Where the porch, where the porch is, where we just store stuff now?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So if I could jump in just really quickly. First of all, for Loretta's son, I didn't catch your first name.
Oh, it's Paul.
Paul. I'm
Coombs.
Lincoln Williams, and I actually interviewed your mother over a series of several interviews several years ago. And I got stories about you that you may want to pay me to keep out of public.
All right, I got to click off now, guys.
Yeah, she's a great woman. I'm glad to hear she's doing well.
She is.
I always admired her energy and she must have been a tough but great mother. I think she was one of the favorite people that I interviewed over that period. But I will share an Ed story, since that's the purpose of this, and that is that Sue notwithstanding, Ed didn't always have a great relationship with the various executive directors of the Beverly Historic Society. And that stemmed from conversations I had with Ed. I live on Bancroft Avenue, which is part of the Hale Farm. And all the ladies, including Ed's mother, were on the Hale Ladies Committee. And they would take care of the house and put dinners on and so forth. And a certain executive director came in and dissolved that group, God knows why. But Ed was a gentle enough person that he would never call that person by name. He would only refer to him as the person that shall not be mentioned.
Yes, I heard all about him when I came here.
Oh, I'll bet you did. He actually lived at the Hale House.
Yep.
He and his family, I don't know, they had 2 kids, our kids' age, and they got to be friends. But 4 people, 2 adults and 2 kids living in a tiny apartment. Not sure how they did that. Particularly considering the enormous amount of money we pay our executive directors.
Well, I think Ed was it took a while to make him mad, but once he was mad at you, it was tough.
Yeah.
I made him mad once, inadvertently, and it was heartbreaking, and we got past it, but yeah, you didn't want Ed to be mad at you.
No.
Well, he never referred to you as the executive director who shall not be mentioned.
No.
So you didn't get that far, Sue.
No, I didn't. It was just one thing.
What strikes me is not only do a lot of us have a connection to historic Beverly, but several of us have a connection outside of that. Now, Ed Brown and I and Al Torsi all worked together at Salem News. And when I started covering Salem District Court, Paul Coombs was the lead prosecutor. So it goes back for quite a while. And, these connections, they just keep popping up and popping up.
That's right. Well, I knew about you and Ed, but I didn't know about Paul, that Paul was connected too. That's really interesting.
Well, I haven't seen him since I'm looking at him now, but I haven't seen him since we were both much younger men at that time. But,
yeah, I'll say that Ed, I got a lot of leeway from Ed because of how much I loved Hale too, and that I was trying really hard to take care of it, and that meant a lot to him.
Are you still going to go ahead with the book?
Yes, the book, we have the book. It's been published. It's on our website. Later on, you'll see a copy of the cover. But for those of you who don't know, we gathered all of these lovely messages. You see some of them on the screen now. Gathered a lot of messages and photos from people, and we published them all in a book, which is available. I sent one to Gail, or Gail and Lisa have their copies now.
The book is, excuse me, the book is wonderful. The way it was set up, the care you took with it, the color, the stories, of course. I can't read the whole thing in a row because I start crying. So you have to read it in small chunks, but it's really a lovely book. So kudos to whoever dealt with it.
Well, Martha put it together, and she did a very nice job. Yep. Ed was, some of our volunteers are only known to a certain group of people depending upon the day they came in here, customarily came in here, but everybody knew Ed. All of our volunteers, even the ones who normally didn't come into the Cabot House. And so everybody really wanted to have that to remember him by.
I think it would embarrass him.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I think he'd mutter about it.
Oh, he'd definitely mutter about it.
How many people have that many people who want to say something about, you know, a tribute to him? So it was lovely. My stories with Ed are all connected pretty much with the Historical Society. I've lived in Beverly all my life, but somehow or other we didn't come in contact. I read his stories, obviously, in the newspaper, but when I retired and went up to the Historical Society to see if there was anything I could do up there, it was Ed who oriented me to the place. And if you haven't been oriented by Ed, you haven't been oriented. I mean, it was like an hour and a half long, and I got the history behind many things and promises of stories later, which I got. But that was the whole thing with Ed that I noticed. He was at every event, and I saw him there because we didn't volunteer on the same days. But he was at every event, and Planters Weekend, we were together for quite a while. And we also, both of us were part of a couple of books that the Historical Society has published, one on Lynch Park and the other one, the Chronicles. So I had a lot of contact with him, and I can't even think of a single time that I walked away without learning something, without having a different view on something. Not always the most flattering for Beverly history, and he wasn't shy about it, but it made you think. And, you know, I couldn't help but think, I know he was a great reporter, don't get me wrong, but I think he also would have been a wonderful teacher.
Yeah.
I think he would have brought history. I had a teacher like that in high school at Beverly, Mr. Carter, and he was in World War II, and that man brought World War II alive, so much so that it's been an interest my whole life. And Ed would have done the same thing. I think he would have had a powerful impact on children in that way. But anyway, everything he did contribute was wonderful. Only one time in the whole time I volunteered was I very nervous about seeing it. He had this idea for a long period of time that when the Beverly-Salem Bridge was paid for, you know, with the tolls that they asked for reimbursement when they did that, that when it was paid for, that the tolls kept going on, and he would make a comment about that, you know, no different than today. Well, I was writing an article about the bridge and, you know, prime sources and all that. So I went into the vaults. Terry had me go right to the committee meetings and everything else. Turns out that the day the bridge debt was paid off, they stopped the tolls. And I said to Terry, you tell him. And she said, what? I said, I'm not telling him. You tell him. She says, he'll be fine with it. And I said, I'm sure he will, but you tell him. And she did. And he was fine with it. But I don't know. I don't know what else to say. He was just such a nice guy. Okay.
You're right. He loved children. Absolutely loved children. He was very fond of Darren's kids. They would come in quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
He was very fond of them. That's the little thing that Darren made for his son, the spyglass there.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the Halloween tours of Hale with Darren's kids would be there with Ed. He was great with them. Yes, totally have memories of those early years of those tours.
I think one of my funny stories is that when they used to have the open house and all three houses would be open for the first time, we would have competition to see how many went to Hale and how many went to Balch. And then he'd say to me, Well, I'll send the ones from Hale to Balch. You send the ones from Balch to Hale. And we did. And at the end of the day, I'd get a phone call. Well, how many did you have all day? Well, I beat you. I had so many more. I go, oh, well, we ran out of time.
Well, I think he beat you on that one, Tina, because his last Saturday at Hale, he had 400 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
He couldn't have been more pleased that day. He was so happy.
And that night, you know, when I found out that he wasn't feeling well, and I called him and I said to him, well, I didn't eat anything. He said, I needed to eat. And when I came home and ate, I felt better. I said, okay. I said, are you all right? I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. You know.
I went out the next day and I bought a bunch of packages of cheese crackers and I put them in the Cabot House kitchen with Ed's name on them. They're still there because I want to make sure that he ate. I'll also say this: Ed's tours were quite long. Gail is correct.
Yep.
And on free days at Hale, when we were both doing tours, and it happened that day, you know, he could spend a week in the parlor. And so I would, when I was getting ready to come, and I would go in and I'd sneak in first and I'd say, Ed, I'm coming up right behind you. You've got to keep moving. And he would slowly.
Yeah.
I can remember it was the year when we lost heat here at the Cabot House, so we opened Hale, and we were open every Saturday in the winter. And so Ed was doing his Saturdays, and I jumped at the chance to work a shift with him, because if you're at Hale, you're either touring or there's really not much to do. And so it gave me a good solid 3 hours just to sit down with Ed and chat. And that's when I found out that my relationship with Ed actually went a lot further back than I imagined, because he was in cahoots with my dad. My dad was the head of emergency communications for the city of Beverly. So whenever there was a fire, such as the First Baptist Church fire, Ed and my dad would chat on the phone, and Ed would actually get all the information from my dad. And in exchange, my dad would ask Ed to go back to the office and call him and tell him what he'd see, because my dad couldn't leave the fire station, you know, because he was manning the telephones. And so when I was at Hale with him for that 3 hours that day, I was writing stuff down, and Ed kept telling me, you don't have to write this down. And thankfully, I basically told him that I was writing it down because I was going to visit my dad, who has Alzheimer's, and that I wanted to make sure that he could remember things. But little did Ed know that I was actually taking oral histories from him so that I could actually document everything that he was telling me. But it was quite an amazing conversation. The stuff that we were talking about when he was responding to the first, you know, the Paradise Crossing train wreck that happened, and he was first on the scene to that. And then when the First Baptist Church burnt, he was first on the scene to that. Some of the stuff that he saw was absolutely, you know, mind-blowing. So the 3 hours I sat with him flew by. And I have copious notes of everything that he was telling me. And thankfully, I was able to leave there and go and visit my dad. And man, my dad lit up like a Christmas tree when I was reminding him of everything that Ed and him had talked about. So it was pretty neat. It was, you will never know the far reach that Ed, you know, had, and everybody that he was connected to. So I feel incredibly blessed that I had that time with him.
Well, he had a nickname in high school. They called him the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
You can see why.
I believe it.
Full of information. And of course, he and I were friends since kindergarten. That's a long time. He was an only child and I was an only child. We were like brothers and sisters. We went to church together, Sunday school together, kindergarten together, all through school together. So he was a, you know, like your right arm. Always made sure I had the baseball schedule for the Red Sox. So, I said, well, this year I won't get my schedule. Well, there isn't one. So
Oh,
who
true.
knew?
He knew.
Yeah.
Say, Tina, talk a little bit about, tell us a story that relates to the church, because that you knew him from there too.
Oh, yeah. We went to Sunday school in the old Dow house, the Dow house. Well, it's torn down now, but there's a plaque there on the other side of the wall commemorating the house. And he was the church historian. So one day he said to me, you know, I'd really like to see the deed to this. He says, but I don't know how to go about it. So I told him, I said, well, you know what? Figure out a day you want to go and I'll take you over there. So we did. And we went over there and we got the original deed. And he wrote the whole thing up that it was left by Susan Mason Loring, that the land was given to be a church forever, I guess. And that's what it said in it. And so he wrote it up for the church history. And you have a copy because I made sure you got one. And then he decided he didn't want to be church historian because he had to go to Boston once a year and couldn't figure out those subways. They were too complicated. So, and he wasn't about to drive there. And I said, no, neither am I.
Thank God.
But the funny little story I got to tell you was he loved my grandson dearly, and because he knew him since he was little, because Ed used to spend the holidays with us because he had no family that he could spend holidays with. So he kept saying to me when Brendan graduated from high school, now you've got to get that boy a car, and you've got to get him a dependable one. You don't give him your old Jeep because that thing's old. And he says, it'll probably fall apart because that's what Brendan thought he'd like. So I said, don't worry about it, Ed. We'll get him a car that's dependable. Well, little did we know, we ended up buying Ed's car for Brendan. And Brendan is thrilled to death because he called him Mr. Ed. Because Ed says, I said, I don't want him calling you Ed. Well, I don't want him calling me Mr. Brown either, he says. We've got to come up with something. So I said, how about Mr. Ed? That's fine. So to this day, he is Mr. Ed. And Brendan is driving Mr. Ed's car, and he's thrilled to death. He loves that little car to death.
I must say that Ed was not known for his driving skills.
No. If you drove behind him, if you noticed, he would hold on to the wheel, and he was way over here.
Oh, I was in the passenger seat once.
Yeah,
Never did that again.
Yeah,
That's why that was why it's a good thing he went to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, because nobody was on the road except him.
I'll never forget the day that Ed came to work here, came to volunteer at the Cabot House, and we had a visit from Ralph Leonard. And Ralph passed, I want to say, about 2 years ago. And they had a nice visit, and then Ed walked him to the door, the side door, to make sure that he got to his car safely. And I saw Ed standing watching Ralph get into his car, and he's shaking his head. So I went over and I said, what's the matter? And he said, look at how he parked. He shouldn't be driving. And for those of you who know the side of the Cabot House, it's just that little parking lot. And I looked, and Ralph's car is at a diagonal, and Ed's car is at a diagonal. And I wanted to say, boy, that's the pot calling the kettle right there. Woo! It was funny.
Yeah. I have an old Ed Gar story. This is back in when he was coaching us in Little League. I guess, I don't know if he would come to give us a ride to games or whatever, but it was like around 1965, I think, because Ford Mustang had just come out, I think the year before, and he pulled up in a brand new Ford Mustang. And at that age, I mean, we just thought that was the coolest coolest car, and he was just the coolest guy. He had to be in his 20s then, you know, and it was like, couldn't believe that Coach Ed had this, like, what we thought was a really fancy sports car. Had never really seen many of them. It was just, so I guess he was, back then he was maybe more into cars, I guess.
Wow, Ed had a Mustang.
He had a Mustang. I'll never forget that, because it was just, I couldn't believe it, you know? Couldn't believe it. I don't know how long he had it for. And they weren't very big either. They were even smaller back then.
Right.
You know. Anyway, he did have one.
He always had a car smaller than he could fit in.
Wait, why is that?
I don't know. And I told him one day, Ed, you should have a Jeep. I don't want a Jeep.
I feel we must address the issue that Ed had with computers.
Oh,
Because, you know, it was funny. He was cursed. There's no question about it. He would buy a computer, it'd be brand new, and he'd come in the next week and he'd say, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do anything, it's no good. And it happened to him over and over again. I just don't understand it, but he definitely, something was seriously wrong with his relationship with technology.
I'd hate to tell you how many times I went over there and took it all apart and put it together again.
I know. What's that about?
I don't know.
So this picture of Ed in the red shirt reminds me about, you know, Ed's troubled relationship with the month of September. And he hated September. And for him, one of the things it evoked for him was the long slide into winter. So it was all of a sudden he dressed in winter clothes, even if it was still 95 degrees. But and you knew it was coming. You knew you were going to have a month of constant griping the entire time, the entire 30 days of September. He just couldn't stand it.
And didn't he have a pin that said like crap-tember?
Yeah, he called it Craptember.
Yeah, he'd call me at night. He called every night at 8 o'clock to make sure. I told him, because one time he fell and he laid in the driveway a while. And I said, you better check in with me every night. I said, let me know you're all right and you're in the house. So he did. Every night at 8 o'clock, the phone would ring. It would be Ed, I'm in, I'm fine. Okay. Well, I just took all the lights in tonight because I don't want any light in the backyard during September. I'm going to hibernate. I said, well, you better call me at 8 o'clock, hibernation or not. I will.
So most of you know about the Balch raffle and that the first prize is dinner at the Balch House. And so Babette Loring won it one year, and she invited Caleb Loring Jr., who's not with us anymore, who was, at the time, he was probably 80 anyway, so this is maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And Babette asked Ed, because she thought that Caleb Jr. would enjoy talking to Ed, and it turned out that Ed, she hadn't thought of this because it hadn't occurred to her, I guess, but Ed was over the moon about being part of the Balch dinner. He was so excited, and they had, I was not there that night. Tina, you must have been there that night.
Yes, I was. Yeah,
He
with
was
Ginny.
thrilled.
He loved that. He had a wonderful time.
Yeah. He and Caleb would have been good together.
Yeah. Well, because we knew him from church, too.
Yeah.
Faye, you wanted to jump in?
Is she there?
You have to
No,
unmute.
I turned everything off because I'm outside and it's pretty noisy, so I apologize. Anyway, I was laughing sort of to myself when you were talking about Ed's computer skills. But the funny thing for me is Ed was a reporter, and my brother's a reporter. My brother also knew Ed. And Ed would type with 2 fingers. And he'd write these fabulous stories, as you all know. And he would be sitting tortured trying to type his things on the computer. So one day I said to him, for heaven's sake, Ed, just give it to me and I'll bring it home and I'll send it to Abby. I can do it. I type fast. I can do it in 10 minutes. He was like, you'll never be able to read my writing. But of course I could. So I typed it up and I'd always ask him this, but he was kind of a stubborn guy. And he liked to complain about how he was so slow typing, but he didn't want anybody's help. And my battery's dying, so I have one other quick thing, and I don't want to monopolize this, but I'm going to have to sign off. But I am now at the Beverly Farm Cemetery. And so this is in the book. Anyone who hasn't bought the book, buy it. It's really interesting to see and hear things that other people experience with Ed. And so the last time I saw Ed was on Memorial Day, a week before he passed. And what was cool about Ed is he always spoke every year for the Memorial Day parade. And he was dressed in a uniform and a really snappy hat. But one of the things that would drive my husband, Jonathan, and I nuts is Ed had so many things to say, and they never had a microphone that worked. That year, honestly, Jonathan and I, it was hot, hot, hot that day. And we were sitting up on the hill, which is behind where I'm sitting now in this bench. And I laughed out loud. I said, they finally got him a microphone and a speaker that works. So it was kind of a funny thing because every year he would say something and you'd creep closer and closer and you could never hear him. So that's my sort of final Ed story because it's the last time I saw him. And there you are.
Do we have any pictures of him in the uniform?
I think so, Abby, because I think somebody did send one and it's in the book.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it is that final time.
I believe it is because I didn't have one. Maybe Martha found it, but somebody found it and it's in the book.
Yes.
And it was that day.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Yeah, there's the cover of the book.
It's at the end of the book.
I did the book so long ago that I don't. And that picture on the top left is courtesy of Nancy Coffey. That's Ed with his grandfather when he was a child.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes. Thank you.
He looks sharp.
Yep. And that's
His
cool
grandpa-
at Bren there.
His grandfather was a wonderful person. So was his father and mother. I knew them all because as a kid, I grew up the time I was over to his house. So I knew them all.
And that's Ed in this room.
I'll never forget. So I took that photo of him with the sunglasses on, and I think my comment is in my story is in the book, but someone had left those sunglasses on the research table and he picked them up and wondered what they were, if they were part of a prop for an exhibit. And I said, no, someone left them there. So he put them on and I took a picture. And I just thought it was so cute. But for any of you who know Ed and what happens at 3 o'clock here during his shift, he fell asleep with those on in that chair for his 3 o'clock nap here at Historic Beverly. So he had them on for a good solid hour. And little did we know, he was actually asleep behind those sunglasses.
Yeah.
I haven't said anything during this entire hour because I did not know Ed. And I guess I was very, very fortunate because last June 1st at the opening of Hale House was the very first time I ever spent time with Ed. And Sue was right. We couldn't get him to stop doing the tours that day. And finally, sometime during mid-afternoon, and maybe it was 3 o'clock. He did sit down, and all of a sudden he sort of took a nap. And I think, Sue, you took over doing the tours at that point. So I feel very sad that I really did not know Ed.
And we were very lucky that we did. And one of the things that I found so extraordinary about him is that, you know, you might think a man of his years would be stuck in his ways, and he probably was in some aspects of his life. And you hear about, when you work in a place like this, I hear stories from other people about volunteers that don't ever want to change what they're doing and never want to do a different tour and never like anything new. He loved everything we were doing. He was the first person to get excited about something, a new program. He was thrilled about Hale. He was thrilled about us maybe putting an elevator in this building that hopefully someday we can do. He had this unbelievable enthusiasm, and it manifested itself in real support for what we were doing, and that doesn't always happen. But he just could not have been a bigger supporter of everybody who works here, who volunteers here, for everything that we do. He just loved it all. And he especially loved Hale, and he really, other than occasionally reminding him of his mother's involvement, you know, everything that we did over there he loved, and he was especially excited about the plans, and that we were going to be doing the pathways and putting the porch back on and putting some new trees in. And I'm very grateful for that, because it made my job a lot easier.
I knew during the time that I worked with him that his approval really meant the world to me. And I can remember when we were putting together the Witches and Bitches, the Badass Women of Beverly tour. We had a very lengthy discussion, the staff did, about, you know, is it going to float, especially we were coming up with this tour during the Me Too movement. And so calling women bitches and, you know, calling them the badass women of Beverly, we were really torn about whether we should put that out there or not. And so I ran it by Ed one day, not even thinking approval. And when I said it, he was like, woohoo! It was the most reaction I ever saw in Ed. And I knew then if Ed approved of it, we were good to go. And that's what I said to Sue, you know, if Ed liked the name, that was vetting enough for me, and that's why we stuck with it. And so it was really always important to get his approval, at least for me and what we were doing. So he was definitely a great mentor for me.
So I'm just going to interject here. It's 10 minutes to 12, 10 minutes to 12. I hope that all of you are going to stay on for the next part of this program, which is the Children and Tenants of Hale Farm talk. This was originally written by Ed, and we're going to do it today as part of our all day long Hale and Ed show. I'm going to give people a few minutes in case you want to get up and get a drink, or you want to whatever, and then we will reconvene at noon. And I want to thank you all for celebrating Ed with us. We still miss him every day, and I'm sure you do too. And this was a really wonderful thing to have. I also will say, in case you're not going to be here for the next hour, that I am really looking forward to welcoming you all back to our properties again. Pay attention. Hopefully it's coming. We hope to open all 3 houses the beginning of July, and that'll be really wonderful when we can do that. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And if you're staying for the program, you can stay right here. It's the same Zoom link, so you don't have to go to a different one. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for doing this, Sue and everyone. This was great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sue. everybody. I can't say, but it was very, very nice.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you guys when we can. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks.
Thank
Have
you.
beautiful-
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're recording it, Abby.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.